Hello and welcome to my channel. I am Candice Tamara. For those that don't know, I am a trauma and mindset coach, and I am on a mission to help you have healthier relationships with yourself and with others without pesky anxiety. And I'm known for helping people go from anxious to secure, dating emotionally unavailable partners, to dating committed partners and being in secure, happy relationships. So this is your go-to channel for anything to do with anxious attachment style, childhood trauma, trauma mindset. So if you haven't done already, please hit subscribe. And if you want more content from me, I'm very active on Instagram and TikTok at Candice Tamara _. And I have a very popular podcast called the Fuck Trauma Podcast. So let's dive into today's episode. Um, so one of the difficulties with having an anxious attachment style is that what you might find is that you often attract partners that might have the opposite attachment style to you, which is an avoidant attachment style. So you might be in a relationship currently with an avoidant attachment style, and or you might have people in your life that have an avoidant attachment style, and which is really common. And if you're in a relationship with a person that's in an avoidant attachment style, then you would be in something called the anxious and avoidant trap. I have a lot of content of that and masterclasses on that if you do want to know more, and I will provide more information on this channel. More about it, but it creates like this push-pull dynamic where anxious and avoidant are two very insecure attachment styles, but they're very different in what they need. And it can mean that it can cause a lot of conflict in your relationships. So yeah, it can cause a lot of conflict in your relationships. And communication can be one of the hardest things when you're in this trap. I personally, as a person that was once anxiously attached myself, I was personally in this trap for many years, and I know in detail how difficult it is when you're in it. And in hindsight now, this was long before I do what I do now, and long before I knew about attachment styles or that I was even anxiously attached. But in hindsight now, this is what I specialize in. So this is some tips that I want to give you in terms of how to manage conflict or difficult conversations with an avoidant attachment style as an anxious attachment style. Because I think there are some main things that you can do that could help the conversation go a bit smoother. And in hindsight, I wish that I had known these things. I wish there was someone like me that could have shared these things with me back then when I was in this kind of dynamic. Because I was forever triggering this person, and this person was then forever triggering me. So it meant that we really didn't solve any kind of conflict at all. We just kind of like put a plaster over it, because we couldn't really come to any kind of agreement, because we were just always triggering each other. So here are some like main things that I would say would really help you to communicate with an avoidant attachment style and to not feel well, not to trigger them as much. I can't guarantee it, but I think that these things definitely would help and would have helped me if I was in this situation. So there's some really big main tips that I really think would be great. So the first thing I would say is that if you're going to have a conversation that you know is going to be heated and maybe cause conflict in this relationship, or it might be a tricky subject, I would recommend that you self-soothe your nervous system. You want to come from a really, really, really soothed part, like, because you don't want your anxiousness to be triggered as much as possible, at least when starting the conversation, because that's when it's going to be very difficult for you to have that productive conversation. So you want to like do what you can to self-soothe. So whatever that is looks for you. Like, luckily there's so many different ways to do that now. There's exercise, there's breath work, there's EFT tapping. Whatever that looks like for you, it's really important that you're in a nice calm state when you approach this conversation, I would say. The other thing I would say is that it's really important that you get clear on what you're asking, because as an anxious attachment style, we're not clear with what we're asking. We tend to spur out a lot of our feelings of how we're feeling about a situation, because we don't really know how to regulate our nervous system, which is why I say to do that first, as self-soothing. And we're not really clear on what we're asking, and we're kind of expecting someone else to figure that out for us. So But unfortunately, that's your job, and that's your job to do. And so, what I would say is really get very clear on what it is that you need to happen in this situation, so that it's as simple as a thing of like, this is how I felt about something, and this is what I'm asking going forward. And I know that's hard as an extra attachment style, but it will save your relationships if you can, because an avoidant attachment style will struggle to hear um over and over again. Like, what we need to remember is that an avoidant attachment style is an insecure attachment style too. And it can be, I think sometimes we're not, it can be hard because an anxious attachment style is so painful and so strong that we can sometimes forget that an avoidant attachment style is also insecure. They're just showing it in a different way. And just because we can't always see it as much as we can with an anxious attachment style because we're so outwardly, theirs is more internal. And it's still really important to recognize that, because I didn't recognize that, and because I was so consumed with my anxiety that I couldn't do that, which is why I say self-soothe first, so that it allows you to also have the perspective of the other person, and that they have an insecure attachment style and they have feelings of not feeling good enough too. So if you come to them and you're spilling out all of your feelings, and let's be honest, a lot of the time we repeat our feelings over and over again of how they made us feel, what they did wrong, it's only going to make them feel really rubbish and not good enough, and they're likely to shut down in that instance. So that's why I always say, like, to speak to an avoidant, I would keep it more of a clearer communication, like a clearer thing of, you can definitely say how you feel, just maybe don't reiterate it over and over and over and over and over again with no ending. Like, I don't think anybody likes really hearing somebody say how, how hurt they are over and over and over again without moving forward from it. I think it's going to irritate anyone. But I think as an actual attachment style, we can get caught up in that because we don't know what it is that we're asking. So this is why I say to make sure that you know first what it is that you're asking. Say how you feel, but then be clear on what you're asking, so that you're giving them the opportunity to say, yes, I can do this going forward. Thank you. You want to have a solution. You don't want to just be talking and talking about how you're feeling, which I think we do. And then the other thing I would say is that, you know, because they do have an insecure attachment style and they do, have feelings too, they can get very defensive very quickly as well, just the same way that we get very defensive very quickly, because they can feel attacked. So I think it's sometimes good to preface a conversation when you're going to go into this conversation, is to preface it with maybe, I'm not blaming you, like, I'm not blaming you, or um this isn't your fault. I just want to talk about this situation so we can find a solution. I think anybody's going to feel attacked. You would feel attacked too. So we have to be very careful of recognizing, we don't want them to feel defensive. We don't want them to feel that that is what's happening there. We want to come to a solution. And I think sometimes we can struggle to communicate that's what we're trying to do, because we're just trying to be heard, and we're feeling all this anxiety. We're trying to be soothed by them, which is why I always say go and soothe yourself first, so that you can have this more clearer communication. And just preface it with, like, I'm not trying to blame you. This is not a blaming conversation. It would just be great if we could have this conversation where I can just share a little bit about what I experienced and what I'm feeling, and find a solution about it. And I think that will help, because they won't feel like, oh my God, they're going to blame me. I need to shut down. I need to protect myself. The other thing I would say is use I statements. I statements, and this is like a massive thing. I think as an anxious attachment style, we tend to, because we're so anxious at the time, which is why I say soothe yourself, is that we can start to be like, you did this, you made me feel this way, you. And anyone is going to feel attacked, especially somebody that also has an insecure attachment style. They're going to feel quite triggered by that. And so that's why it's really important to say, I feel that, I experienced this, because then you're taking responsibility for what you felt and what happened, and from your perspective, and it's less attacking to them, which will hopefully make the conversation go smoother. Because if you're saying, I'm not trying to place any blame in this conversation, and then you're going, you did this, you're placing blame. So that's where you want to say, like, I'm not trying to place any blame, I was wondering, can we find some solution? But then you also say, I felt I did this and I did that and I recognize this and I can see this, and you know, then you're talking about yourself and you're not placing blame on someone, and then what you'll probably find is that they're able to hear you a lot better. They're also able to validate you a lot better because they're not feeling so attacked and they're not triggered themselves. And then my last point to say is that you have to understand that an avoidant attachment style will process information differently to an anxious attachment style. They might be a little bit slower where they want time to think about it by themselves. And I know that is really hard as an anxious attachment style because we want to have the conversation right here and right now. And we need the answers right here and right now, right? And it can be really difficult. But actually, when you try and get that from an avoidant attachment style, if it's something that they need time to process and think about and figure out, you're only going to be forcing something from them, and that's when likely they're going to say something that you don't want to hear, and or they're going to shut down on you and walk away or leave you for a second because they need space. So actually, like, accepting that they might need space to process it and just not making them feel bad for that. And I know it's hard because you're so anxious and you want the answers. So this is where soothe yourself, do things for yourself, make yourself feel good in that time. But just understand, and I think this would help because boy, oh boy, do I really wish when I was in a relationship with this attachment style, I wish I would have known these things, because you know, as an anxious attachment style, we tend to take things very personally. And if I had known this was the way that they were, because I didn't have any idea about attachment styles back then, if I'd have known this, then I would have been able to be like, okay, they process things differently. Them needing space is actually not about me. They just need to figure it out, process, come back with the answer. Can they do this? What were their thoughts on it? And then we can have a harmonious conversation where we both feel regulated and we're both not triggering each other. But in hindsight, trying to push someone, please tell me the answer now, tell me the answer now, tell me the answer now, when I've already made them feel blamed, made them feel defensive, and they're shutting down inside because they're so triggered and I didn't understand this. And then I'm like, literally, no, tell me now, tell me now, tell me now, tell me now, because I'm so desperate to be soothed by them. That's not fair, because I'm also causing them to be very triggered. And I think because we can't see the trigger, we can't feel their triggers, we can't feel how they feel inside, it can be easier to dismiss that. And I know I did it, so I know that we can do it. And that's why I just want to be clear that, you know, they have different ways of doing things too, and actually you have different ways too, and I'm sure they work with you with those things. But actually, for a more harmonious situation, and for you to get what you need in the situation, it would be better if they need space to process something, that you give them the space to process it. It will avoid a lot more conflict. They will come back, they'll probably come back with what you want them to say or have more answers, and it will be a much more harmonious relationship, or you know, conversation in general, because there's not like this conflict where you're needing something, they can't give it to you, they're shutting down, and then you're getting triggered, and then you're, you know, over and over again. So I think that is some of my tips that I would think, if you just were able to follow these tips, I have no doubt that your conversations would go a lot smoother in general, in these kind of situations, and with an avoidant attachment style. But even if you were talking to an anxious attachment style, I would say some of these things can be, or even anyone, it's, you know, managing conflict in this way, it's always good to use I statements and take the time to soothe yourself and be clear on what you're asking, and then respect boundaries. So it's not just an avoidant attachment style, it's in general. These are good rule of thumbs to be using and to be practicing for ourselves. So yeah, thank you for listening. Hit subscribe if you want to hear more. I will definitely be doing more, and I will see you again.